According to Israel's foreign minister, 1,200 people were killed that day in a horrific massacre of civilians going about their daily lives.
Two of those killed were Noah and Gidi. They were amongst the crowds of young people at a music festival in southern Israel where Hamas terrorists opened fire indiscriminately. Now, joining us from Tel Aviv is Eden Raviv, a cousin to Noah and Gidi. And Eden, thank you so much indeed for taking the time out. We really do appreciate it. Tell me about your cousins first up. Their lives cruelly ended in that horrific attack. What were they like as individuals?
They were really lovely, open, liberal people from a warm family. The family was very close. Just, young people starting out in their lives. They were both starting higher education, and Gidi had just moved in with his girlfriend. Just really warm, family-oriented people that were taken too soon and with no justifiable reason.
And Eden, if you feel comfortable in doing so, can you talk us through what happened on that day, both to your cousins and how you eventually found out what had happened to them?
Yeah, so they're actually my second cousins. We're once removed, but as the day was unfolding, obviously no one really knew what had happened straight away. We're still learning the gravity of what happened, and we knew pretty early on. Obviously, we knew that Noah and Gidi were at the festival, and Noah had called her mother after the rocket attacks that Hamas threw onto Israel at around 6:30. And she said they were fine, they were safe. And later we know from witness testimony that they actually got into a car and drove away, and then the Hamas terrorists reached the car. And that's probably around the time they were killed. Unfortunately, it took over a week to identify their bodies using DNA. That's been the case for many people here whose loved ones had their bodies brutalized to the point where they were unidentifiable. So it's really been just a constant grief on a collective level, because it's a very small country and everyone knows someone who is dead or kidnapped, or knows someone whose loved one is dead or kidnapped.
What made you decide to go out to Israel so quickly?
It was really hard for me to be away when I felt like my people were suffering, my family was suffering. I wanted to be around them as they grieve. And also I started to feel really unsafe and really unwelcome in the UK. I'm a student at the University of Oxford, and unfortunately, I can't say that the institutions I'm a part of have done enough to call the support for terrorism on campus. I know I, as well as other Jewish, even non-Israeli students, just Jewish students, don't feel safe within our identity.
That doesn't say an awful lot about this country. You say you feel unsafe and unwelcome when you were on campus. Can you give us a couple of examples why?
Well, when you hear people shouting in the streets from Oxford to Gaza, long live the Intifada. Now, what does Intifada mean? Intifada was brutal violence. People were being blown up in cafes and on buses here. What does from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free mean? Free from what? Free from Jews, right? Like, these slogans have very clear histories and meanings, and to deny that is intellectual dishonesty. Khayber Khayber ya Yehud, which you hear on the streets of London. They're not saying Khayber Khayber ya Zionist, right? They're saying Yehud, Jews. So I think anyone who looks at what's happening and the masses coming out, and even if they're not physically harming Jews yet, which I think is the next step, they are inciting towards violence of Jews, not Israelis, Jews.
And Eden, if I may, can I ask what your viewpoint is? Obviously, you were over here at Oxford University. Now you're there far closer in Israel. What your viewpoint is on the government's response to Hamas and what's happening now in Gaza and the plight, the humanitarian crisis that is impacting greatly the Palestinian people? Yeah,
it's really difficult to watch what's happening. I don't think anyone here is comfortable seeing what's happening in Gaza. It's horrible. And all of us think that civilian lives should never be affected by conflict. And it's hard to see when children are hurt and killed. That doesn't mean that the war isn't justifiable. That doesn't mean, we didn't choose this war. We didn't start a war. There was a ceasefire. There was a ceasefire on October 6th, and it was over on October 7th when an active war started. And I have to say, I take issue with the framing that your guest gave before me when he said that what's happening now is collective punishment. It's not collective punishment, it's war. And I envy people in the West who are so privileged that they haven't had to see war in the recent past. And I understand it's really uncomfortable to see because war is always, always ugly. And even more so, especially when we're fighting not a regular military, but a terrorist organization that uses civilian infrastructures. So obviously, it's much harder to protect civilian lives that way. But the state of Israel has a responsibility to its citizens. And when you're faced with an enemy who says, we will continue to do attacks to harm civilians in the way that we did on October 7th, which, let's be clear, they didn't go around shooting or just firing rockets. They raped, they tortured, they gouged eyes, they cut off breasts. Like, I'm sorry, I'm being graphic, but this is what happened. Something like 80% of people were tortured before they were killed. Now, if you say you're going to do that over and over again, don't you think the state has a responsibility to its citizens to make sure that that doesn't happen again? And don't you think that while we have 240 hostages in Gaza held by terrorists, our government has to do everything they can to bring them back? These are children, women, men, elderly, people without their medication, babies that I don't know who's changing their diapers, who's calming them as they cry. We need to have them back. And I would love the war to be over. I want a ceasefire under two conditions.
Eden,
our hostages back.
I have to finish you there. I have to finish you there, not out of disrespect, because it's one of the most powerful interviews ever. Nick and I have to move on, but we really, really appreciate you, and our love and thoughts are with you and with your family. This is Talk Today, my friends.